Good evening. Before we begin, a quick reminder, everything you'll hear tonight is based on verified public information. No leaks, no speculation, just what we can confirm. Australia's alpine region isn't usually a place that holds its breath. But since late August 2025, the valleys around Porepunkah and Mount Buffalo National Park have lived in a strange quiet, broken only by helicopters and unanswered questions. On the morning of 26 August 2025, two Victoria police officers, Detective Leading Senior Constable Neil Thompson and Senior Constable Vadim Dewart, were shot dead while attending a rural property. A third officer was seriously injured but survived. The man police named as the suspect, Dezi Freeman, fled into dense bushland bordering Mount Buffalo. Within hours, the high country became the center of one of the largest police operations in modern Victorian history. Roadblocks sealed the small tourist towns of Bright and Porepunkah. Tactical units arrived. Helicopters traced loops across the mountain spine. Drones scanned valleys and ridgelines. The search stretched day and night through forests that can swallow both signal and sound. But weeks later, after every ravine was combed and every lead exhausted, Freeman remained missing. Police urged patience. The public demanded clarity. And in the middle stood silence, a kind of official stillness that often follows when certainty runs out. Today, we revisit what's confirmed, what remains open, and what this case reveals about the limits of search, communication, and trust. Because sometimes the real story isn't only about who disappeared, but how a nation responds when someone does. The first 3 days defined everything that followed. At 5 a.m. on 26 August, police were called to a disturbance near Porepunkah. Within minutes, gunfire was reported. 2 officers were fatally struck. As emergency crews rushed to the scene, nearby residents were told to stay inside. The shooter, police said, had escaped into the alpine wilderness. By mid-morning, a full-scale operation was underway. Units from the Special Operations Group, the Critical Incident Response Team, and regional commands in Wangaratta and Bright converged on the area. The State Emergency Service established support posts. Parks Victoria closed tracks and lookouts. Air support joined almost immediately, its rhythmic thrum echoing across the valleys. The search grid expanded fast, 10 kilometers, then 20, then further. Every access road was monitored. Locals described the sudden transformation of a quiet tourist belt into a zone of checkpoints, flashing lights, and high-visibility jackets. Reporters arrived by the dozen. National headlines called it a manhunt in the mountains. Behind the spectacle, however, officers faced a brutal geography. The Mount Buffalo Plateau rises steeply from river flats into labyrinths of granite, fern, and shadow. Winter fog rolls without warning. Even GPS units falter beneath the canopy. It's a terrain that punishes haste, one search and rescue veteran later told the ABC. Every step costs time. Every decision burns daylight. That reality shaped police tactics. Instead of pushing recklessly, they built containment lines, blocking exits, checking huts, clearing campgrounds one by one. By the second night, drones and thermal imaging were in constant rotation, but visibility remained poor. Detecting a human heat signature through cold rock and damp foliage is never simple. Technology, for all its promise, still bends to nature's rules. Inside the temporary command post at Bright, shifts ran close to 16 hours. Officers slept in vehicles or borrowed motel rooms. Volunteers delivered food. This crews maintained perimeter lighting through sleet and mist. What outsiders saw as coordination often felt on the ground like controlled exhaustion. On the third day, the focus shifted from chase to endurance. Police urged calm. They confirmed no new sightings, but repeated that Freeman was believed to be armed and dangerous. Public safety warnings blanketed the region. Meanwhile, the search perimeter held. No evidence of escape routes, no confirmed traces inside. In those 72 hours, the manhunt transformed from emergency to marathon. It tested the limits of both manpower and patience. And as the operation grew, so did the question that would haunt it. How can someone vanish so completely in a landscape watched by drones, cameras, and national attention? That question, part geography, part psychology, remains the thread connecting every update since. The Victorian High Country is more than backdrop. It's a character in its own right, ancient, unpredictable, and often merciless to those who underestimate it. The Mount Buffalo Plateau, carved by wind and time, stretches above 1,700 meters. From a distance it looks majestic. Up close, it becomes a maze of granite tors, sudden drops and narrow gorges where visibility can fall to zero. For searchers, this terrain defines every decision. In the early stages of the manhunt, police deployed drones and infrared imaging, tools designed to overcome such obstacles. But even the best technology struggles here. The canopy confuses heat readings. Cold rock radiates warmth after sunset, mimicking movement. Wind gusts distort audio detection. What looks like precision on a screen is, in practice, a blur of false positives. Add to that the sheer scale. Mount Buffalo National Park covers more than 30,000 hectares, terrain where one person can vanish within minutes. Tracks fork, creeks flood, and weather shifts by the hour. In late winter, mist can roll in thick enough to mute radio signals and ground helicopters. Search veterans know this reality well. In interviews with Victoria's State Emergency Service, they've described how simple orientation becomes psychological warfare, exhaustion against endurance, silence against focus. When officers fan out through such country, they're not just tracing a suspect, they're fighting the land itself. That helps explain why major Australian manhunts often stretch weeks, sometimes months. Technology can map terrain, but it can't flatten it. Even small miscalculations, one ridge missed, 1 hour lost, can shift an entire operation off course. It's also why Victoria Police publicly warned early on that the Freeman search would be prolonged and difficult. Officials knew this wasn't an urban chase or a simple grid pattern. It was an operation where the landscape dictated the rules. For locals, the mountain's scale is familiar but no less intimidating. The road to the plateau winds through dense forest before opening into alpine plain. In winter, sections ice over, creeks swell. Fog hangs low enough to erase the horizon. Many residents, even experienced hikers, know that getting lost here isn't about carelessness. It's about timing. And so, as days turned into weeks, the geography itself became part of the mystery. How could a person survive there without trace? Or if he didn't, why had nothing surfaced? No camp, no belongings, no signal flare, no remains. The bush has its own rhythm. It gives nothing for free. To understand how this case reached stalemate, you first have to understand that the High Country does not forgive human plans. It absorbs them. It erases their edges. That's the landscape Victoria Police are still negotiating. A wilderness that keeps its secrets, not through malice, but through patience. Behind every televised headline, every image of officers combing bushland, lies a daily choreography of logistics and fatigue. The Freeman search was no exception. From the first hours, police established a forward command post in Bright, a small town turned operational hub. Portable offices, temporary tents and satellite towers lined an oval, usually used for weekend cricket. From there, rotations were organized. Air units, K-9 teams, tactical officers, and SES volunteers. Each morning began the same way, a 6 a.m. briefing, map updates pinned to corkboards, assignments read over the hum of generators. Teams carried GPS trackers, radios, and thermal scopes, gear that sounds high-tech but is still hostage to batteries, weather, and terrain. Local cafes opened early, serving coffee to crews heading out. Residents recall the valley filled with noise, rotor blades, four-wheel drives, distant voices calling through static. For a community built on tourism and quiet trails, it was surreal, a transformation from alpine calm to emergency zone. Conditions were punishing. Many officers worked 16-hour shifts, sleeping in vehicles or makeshift shelters. The cold bit through gloves, mud swallowed boots. Every slope demanded caution. Every creek crossing risked injury, yet morale remained determined. Senior officers rotated personnel to prevent burnout. Volunteers from the Country Fire Authority supported search teams with lighting and meal runs. Even small gestures, a thermos of tea, a hand on a shoulder, became morale currency. By the end of the first week, over 800 people had been interviewed. Every cabin, campsite, and service road was checked. Public tip lines remained open 24 hours. Despite the scale, officials were clear. No confirmed sighting of Freeman had been recorded. As the days passed, priorities shifted. The early contain and capture phase gave way to locate and recover. Police reframed the mission as a search for a missing person. That change wasn't surrender, it was procedure. When risk assessments show no verified movements, operations pivot from confrontation to confirmation. Around this time, speculation flooded online spaces. Some questioned whether the suspect had escaped the perimeter. Others suggested he was hiding in plain sight. But Victoria Police made no such statements. Their updates remained measured. We continue to follow all credible leads. Inside the command tent, that discipline mattered. Information management in large-scale searches is delicate. Too much chatter breeds chaos. Too little breeds rumor. Officers logged every coordinate, every unverified sighting, every radio glitch. Paperwork grew as thick as the fog outside. In hindsight, many observers noted how the operation balanced precision and fatigue. It's easy to judge outcomes from afar, but in those days, cold, wet, endless, the people in that valley were confronting uncertainty hour by hour. One volunteer later put it simply, "You don't realize how big the mountain is until you're asked to find one man in it." That statement captures both the human scale and the emotional truth of the Freeman search. For all the maps, for all the gear, success still depends on something intangible: endurance, the willingness to keep walking when nothing seems to change. In the next section, we turn from the ground to the people living just beyond the search lines, the communities who watched helicopters overhead and wondered what it all meant. When the noise fades, silence becomes the loudest sound. By the end of September 2025, the Mount Buffalo operation had entered a quieter phase. The roadblocks were scaled back, command tents packed away, and crews redeployed to other regions. The manhunt didn't end, it simply changed shape. What had begun as an urgent chase now moved into the slower rhythm of investigation. For weeks, Victoria Police maintained a public statement: "The search for Dezi Freeman is ongoing." Detectives continued door-to-door interviews, reviewing CCTV from fuel stations and rural roads. Yet no verified sightings emerged. Every tip was logged, but most led nowhere. The tone of updates shifted. Press conferences that once filled nightly news became short written releases, measured, cautious, procedural. It wasn't neglect, it was the institutional instinct to protect an active case. But for a public-fed daily adrenaline, that restraint felt like withdrawal. Operational secrecy is not unusual in Australia. During open investigations, authorities can withhold evidence to prevent contamination or to safeguard potential witnesses. Still, perception matters. When official voices grow faint, other ones grow louder. Online forums began spinning theories, each more dramatic than the last. None confirmed, all amplified by curiosity. Inside policing circles, the slowdown was practical. After exhaustive searches and forensic sweeps, focus returned to intelligence, checking associates, tracing financial and digital footprints, testing any new lead against the timeline. The search on foot had yielded little, but that didn't mean the case was cold. The $1 million reward for information remained active, an unusually high figure that signaled commitment rather than closure. Yet even rewards can lose power when weeks pass without clarity. By October, Victoria Police reopened sections of Mount Buffalo National Park to the public. It was a symbolic gesture, balancing safety with community need. Tourists returned cautiously. Locals exhaled, though the tension lingered. A police spokesperson called the reopening a sign of confidence. Critics read it differently, proof that the trail had gone cold. In truth, both were partly right. The mountain was safer, but the mystery remained. The silence that followed the sirens wasn't empty. It was the sound of a system catching its breath, recalibrating its focus, and deciding how much to say when the simplest answer was still missing. Because in every major manhunt, there comes a moment when urgency collides with uncertainty, and from that collision, silence is born. If the police carried the search on their shoulders, the community carried it in their hearts. The towns of Bright, Wangaratta, and Porepunkah are small enough that strangers stand out, and news travels faster than weather. In the early days of the operation, locals cooked meals for officers, lent out sheds for equipment, and opened guest houses to exhausted volunteers. It was solidarity in motion, but when the operation slowed, something else took its place, an unease that settled like fog over the valley. Businesses reopened, but conversations kept circling back to the same name. Tour guides fielded questions from visitors. Is it safe up there? Parents reminded children to stay close on hiking trails. For residents, the mountain that once symbolized recreation had become a reminder of uncertainty. Even as parks reopened, signs of the search lingered: orange tape on trees, flattened grass where helicopters had landed, the faint imprint of tire tracks in clay. Every mark carried memory. Local media played a delicate role. Reporters balanced empathy with accuracy, reminding viewers that speculation could harm both investigation and community morale. Yet audiences, conditioned by streaming-era true crime, wanted constant updates. When none came, frustration filled the gap. Psychologists who study collective trauma note that unresolved cases create what they call extended stress loops. The community remains in a state of alert long after danger has passed, because closure never arrives. In Bright, that loop is visible in the cautious smiles, the hesitant optimism, the way every rumour still draws attention. The Alpine Shire Council organised forums to reassure residents and clarify that police presence would remain visible for months. For some, it was comforting. For others, it felt like an endless reminder. One local cafe owner described it plainly: "We gave everything to that search, our food, our time, our town, and then one day it just stopped. That stop created a vacuum. In it grew reflection about safety, about trust, and about the thin line between public right to know and police duty to protect." Community isn't measured by how loudly people react when tragedy hits. It's measured by how quietly they rebuild when the cameras leave. Around Mount Buffalo, rebuilding means remembering, without letting fear define the landscape. As spring returned to Victoria's high country, tourists once again hiked the buffalo tracks. The air smelled of eucalyptus and thawing snow. Yet beneath the beauty lingered a question shared by everyone who had lived through those weeks of tension. When the search ends, what stays behind? The mystery or the memory? The story of Dezi Freeman isn't unfolding in isolation. Australia has faced manhunts before, each one leaving lessons written in sweat, time and paperwork. In 2011, New South Wales police tracked Malcolm Naden, a fugitive bushman who evaded capture for 7 years in dense forests near Gloucester. The search cost millions and tested every modern technology available. In the end, what caught him wasn't drones or heat cameras. It was persistence, a patrol's quiet observation near a remote cabin. In 2019, another major search gripped the nation when Patrick Lydon, armed and dangerous, disappeared into the Victorian bush after a series of rural robberies. That manhunt lasted weeks and ended with surrender, not confrontation. It proved what police analysts already knew: time can be a better ally than force. These cases, different as they are, share a common thread: terrain. In the Australian bush, scale is both shield and obstacle. Trees become walls, valleys turn into blind spots. The same landscape that defines the country also defines its mysteries. What distinguishes the Freeman search, however, is its timing. Unlike older operations, this one unfolded in an era of real-time commentary. Every update was dissected online within minutes. Public impatience, fed by constant connectivity, reshaped expectations. People wanted resolution as quickly as they refreshed their feeds. For investigators, that environment adds invisible pressure. Each decision, when to scale, when to brief media, when to pause, carries the risk of public judgment. In older manhunts, silence was strategy. Today, it's interpreted as failure, and yet the fundamentals haven't changed. Major searches still rely on patience, coordination, and the humility to let geography dictate tempo. What technology offers in reach, it often takes away in simplicity. Drones can scan valleys, but they can't replace a tracker's intuition. Data can predict paths, but it can't interpret fear or exhaustion. Across Australia, training manuals now reference these operations as cautionary tales. They highlight the importance of local knowledge, the limits of overextension, and the risk of turning public expectation into operational noise. The Freeman case will likely join those chapters, not because of what was found, but because of what it revealed. How modern policing walks a tightrope between transparency and control, speed and accuracy, leadership and fatigue. The question isn't whether the system tried hard enough, it's whether the system can still learn from its own silence. Every operation has a budget, but what price do you put on uncertainty? Victoria Police have not released a total figure for the Freeman search, and they may not for some time. Large-scale manhunts often take years to account for. Equipment rentals, overtime, fuel, air hours, accommodation, all accumulate quietly. What we do know is that by September this was already one of the most resource-intensive operations in recent Victorian history. But numbers alone miss the story. The real cost of the Mount Buffalo search runs deeper, into the fatigue of officers, the disruption of towns, and the erosion of public trust that follows unanswered questions. In Bright, hotel bookings vanished overnight when the park closed. Local businesses lost tourism income at the height of winter holidays. The council's recovery plan now lists the search as both a logistical challenge and an economic one. Recovery, they wrote, will take a season, not a week. Inside police ranks, the emotional toll is harder to measure. Search operations build momentum like storms. They feed on adrenaline, camaraderie, and a shared mission. When they end without resolution, that energy collapses into silence, and silence is heavy. Officers describe going home, but still scanning tree lines in memory. For families connected to the tragedy, the fallen officers and the accused, the cost is heavier still. 2 lives lost in service, 1 man missing, and a ripple that reaches every conversation about trust in law enforcement. Financial audits can track spending. They can't track grief. Experts in crisis management often warn that unresolved cases carry what's called residual expenditure, not in money, but in credibility. Each unanswered question demands another press release, another investigation, another year of scrutiny. That cycle drains more than budgets. It drains confidence. The Victorian government has since announced reviews into interagency coordination for future large-scale operations. These are not scandals. They are standard post-incident evaluations. Still, their very existence acknowledges that something, somewhere, didn't flow perfectly. The cost of silence is harder to log. It appears in comment threads, in public fatigue, in the slow fading of trust that once felt automatic. Transparency, like funding, has to be renewed, or it runs out. What the Freeman case leaves behind is not only a financial ledger, but a human one. It asks a question that lingers longer than any headline. What are we willing to spend to feel safe, and what do we lose when safety remains unseen? In any investigation, the truth has 2 halves, what's discovered and what's shared. The Freeman case now sits at that crossroads. Victoria Police insist the operation remains open, but most new details are withheld under the banner of operational sensitivity. It's a phrase designed to protect fairness and safety, but over time it begins to sound like distance. transparency is complicated in active cases. Revealing evidence too soon can jeopardize prosecutions or expose tactical procedures. Yet secrecy carries its own risk, the erosion of public confidence. In the gap between fact and explanation, speculation thrives. Legal experts in Australia describe this as a structural dilemma, not a moral one. Agencies are bound by the Evidence Act and by coroner's protocols that restrict what can be released before findings are finalized. Silence, then, isn't always a cover-up. Sometimes it's compliance. But that distinction is easy to lose once frustration sets in. Across modern democracies, policing has entered a new era of scrutiny. Audiences expect the immediacy of social media, not the patience of process. In that context, every withheld document, every quiet correction, can feel like concealment. Victoria Police are aware of that perception. Their media briefings now emphasize empathy as much as detail. Officers thank volunteers publicly, reaffirm that the search continues, and acknowledge the pain of uncertainty. But the public appetite for closure often exceeds the system's capacity to deliver it. Transparency, in its truest form, is about balance. Reveal enough to maintain trust, hold enough to preserve justice. Yet the Freeman case shows how fragile that balance can be. When institutions move slowly, trust becomes collateral damage. In Bright, some residents have learned to live with that ambiguity. Others still want more. But perhaps the hardest truth is this: full transparency rarely arrives on schedule. It arrives in fragments, through coronial findings, court transcripts, and quiet acknowledgements months or years later. Until then, the public and the system remain bound by the same uneasy promise that truth, however delayed, is still worth waiting for. As of October 2025, the search for Dezi Freeman continues. Mount Buffalo National Park has partially reopened, with visitors allowed back under clear safety guidelines. Police maintain that specific high-risk zones remain off-limits while investigations continue. The $1 million reward for information remains active, one of the highest ever offered in Victoria. Officers from the Homicide Squad and Missing Persons Unit still manage incoming tips. Most lead nowhere, but every credible report is investigated. In official briefings, police confirm that forensic analysis of materials collected early in the search is complete. No confirmed traces of Freeman have been found. No evidence of foul play beyond the original shootings has been released. The coroner's process, standard in such cases, is ongoing. The reopening of Mount Buffalo was more than logistics. It was symbolic. Authorities described it as a step toward normalcy, an acknowledgement that communities must move forward even when answers lag behind. For local tourism operators, it was a relief. For many residents, it was bittersweet. The mountain, once a theater of chaos, has returned to quiet beauty. Snow has melted from the peaks, trails have reopened, and the hum of helicopters has faded into birdsong. Yet the story still echoes. The two fallen officers are remembered through tributes and vigils held across Victoria. Their names now mark a new chapter in the long ledger of service and sacrifice. And Freeman? His absence remains both fact and symbol, an unsolved line in a story about visibility, trust, and the limits of control. Police remain clear. They believe someone, somewhere, knows something. The investigation continues, but for the public, the question persists. How long can a mystery survive before it becomes memory? When the noise fades and the headlines move on, what remains is not just a mystery, it's a mirror. The Freeman case reminds us that every search is really two journeys, one through the bush and one through ourselves. The physical one ends when tracks run cold. The other, inside our institutions, our communities, and our trust, keeps going long after the boots have left the ground. 2 police officers are gone. 1 man remains missing. An entire region carries the echo of both. Between those facts lives the question that no investigation can fully answer. How do we keep believing in systems that must sometimes stay silent to function? Maybe that's what this story has always been about, not a disappearance, but the fragile thread between transparency and patience, between the right to know and the need to wait. Around Mount Buffalo, spring has returned. The grass has regrown where command tents once stood. The forest is quiet again, but the silence feels different now. Less uncertainty, more reflection. People still look toward the ridges and wonder, not in fear, but in recognition of how easily one life can ripple through many. The search for Dezi Freeman may one day close, or it may never. Either way, the lesson remains. Truth takes time, and time demands humility, because in the end, justice isn't only about who's found, it's about who keeps looking. If you've followed this story all the way to the end, thank you. Your attention means more than you think. Please like this video, leave your thoughts respectfully in the comments, and subscribe for more calm, verified storytelling. Every interaction helps independent reporting stay visible and balanced. And remember, sometimes the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs someone willing to listen.